I want to believe that 2023 will really be better. So after all what you've gone through for the whole year, we are here today to take stock. But before going further, let us invite God in our presence. We can bow our heads and then pray in our individual faith. In the name of God we pray. So our agenda folks in the room have what we call 16 days of activism. It's on, and we're happy that colleagues are here joining us from Ghana, Accra, to see how we can actually put fuel to that advocacy. So today, on behalf of the Institute for Governance Reform and the Ghana Center for Democratic Development, the Afrobarometer, I welcome you to this conversation. I know a lot of you must have known about IGR. What we normally do is to bring citizens-driven evidence. And sometimes we even go beyond citizens' evidence. We do analytics or bring it to bear on conversations on national development, governance, democracy. So what we do is actually we support people in the driving seat of policy to make decisions that are based on evidence. So today's conversation is one such discussion where we've been supported by the Afrobarometer to see how we can make Sierra Leoneans have their say in the direction of gender in the country, gender development in the country. So I don't want to bore you too much with an elaborate welcome. I think I'll be giving the floor largely to Fredlin, who will be taking the stage today. Welcome, Madam Minister. Let's give a round of applause to the Minister who actually took time to be here. I will be calling Daniel Amwa Atol. He's the Afrobarometer project manager for Anglophone West Africa. And Daniel will tell us extensively about Afrobarometer. But I think I'll be remiss in my introduction if I fail to introduce Mame. Mame is actually the engine room. She actually supports. Mame, come, let's people see you. She supports us from Accra. Most of the data we generate, the visibility we get around the Afrobarometer, people think, thank you very much. People think it's just IGR, but it's actually this is the oxygen behind us. So, Daniel, on that note, I'll just invite you to introduce the Afrobarometer survey and the methodology. Thank you. A round of applause for Daniel, please.
Thank you, Andrew, and good morning to everyone. Well, Mrs. Those who will be seated at the high table have not been introduced, but I believe some of them will be around. I would like to say all protocols observed, and I'm happy for their presence. My name is Daniel Amato. I work with the Ghana Center for Democratic Development, and I'm also the Afrobarometer manager for Anglophone West African countries and then North African countries and a few Portuguese-speaking countries. I'm here with my colleague who was introduced, Mame, to support IDR in releasing Afrobarometer Round 9 survey findings. But before we do that and we go into the details in terms of the findings, I will take some few minutes and walk us through what Afrobarometer is about, what Afrobarometer stands for. Before I do that, let me also say that Afrobarometer and CDD is very happy for availing yourself this morning to participate in this program. And we believe one of our goals, which is to bring citizens' views and opinions on how their countries are being governed to policymakers. As we pick up the information from here and we move out from here, we will continue with the debate and we'll try our best to inject whatever findings we are going to present today into whatever policy decisions are taken in Sierra Leone. So let me quickly run you through what Afrobarometer is about. So we start by looking at what is Afrobarometer. We normally say that Afrobarometer is a Pan-African, non-partisan, non-profit survey research network. Yes, the project started as a network, a loose network where we have individuals, institutions in the various countries, and then working together with the pioneers of the project to conduct a survey. But as I'm speaking today, for the past 5 years or so, Afrobarometer has become a legal entity registered according to the laws of Ghana, and the secretariat is also based in Ghana. So for now, Afrobarometer is no longer a loose network that is used to be when it started in 1999, but it's a legal entity. And what we normally do is to go out there, collect data relating to opinions of citizens in the various countries where we do the survey and their experiences and how they evaluate governance, democracy, and the quality of life within their countries. We've so far done 8 rounds of survey, and currently we are about ending the 9th round of survey. As I'm speaking, some of my colleagues are in Sao Tome and Principe now. That is I think the last 3rd country to go for round 9, and then we may be ending round 9 somewhere early January, where Congo Brazzaville and then Guinea-Bissau will complete the round. So for some of the service countries, they have been able to go through 9 rounds of survey. IGR started the survey, I think, somewhere in 2012 or so. So the Sierra Leone as a country has had 5 rounds of survey. So whatever we are presenting to you, even though it is the round 9 survey findings, that is the 5th round of survey in Sierra Leone, because they came in when we were doing, I think, round 5. And so they've done 5 rounds of survey. We've been working so far in about 39 African countries, but the whole process started with just 12 African countries in round 1. Then in round 2, it moved to 16 countries. Round 3, we went to 18 countries. And then, round 3, we went to 18. Then round 4, we went to 20 countries. And then round 5, there was a huge jump from 20 countries to 34. That jump came about because at that point in time, the Mo Ibrahim Foundation wanted to depend also on citizens' opinion in terms of their governance index. So Mo Ibrahim came in to support Afrobarometer to expand the number of countries to 34 so that they would get that data. Ever since that time, Mo Ibrahim Foundation has been supporting the Afrobarometer, but the donors are virtually from different countries. We have CEDA Sweden, CEDA Canada, we have World Bank coming in at a point in time, DFID and all those countries. We don't get our resources from any government institution because we want to be independent, we want to be straightforward with whatever we are doing. So we receive our support from donor institutions, but nothing from any government in the countries that we do the survey. The goal of Afrobarometer 1 is to give ordinary citizens a voice in policy making in their various countries. So the idea is, if we gather opinions through our surveys, we share these findings with governments and government officials. So yesterday, for instance, we had to hold a discussion with some of the government officials and present most of the findings to them, for them to know that this is how citizens are thinking about issues within Sierra Leone. And therefore, as I said, is to make sure we are able to gather citizens' opinion and present these opinions to policy makers, policy advocates, civil society organizations that work towards enhancing welfare of citizens, then academics, news media, donors and investors, and even ordinary African citizens. In Sierra Leone, the national partner that conducts the survey is IGR. But for those of you who might have known Afrobarometer since we started in 2012. You realize that during that time, there was this institution, ITASTAC. They were doing the data collection, and then Campaign for Good Governance was also doing the dissemination part. But the system is such that after a number of rounds, Afrobarometer do rebidding in these countries again, and so through the rebidding, IGR became the most promising institution, and so there was that kind of switch. So the whole idea behind it is that we are trying to build capacity of research institutions to is one of the goals in Africa. And so as you are doing it, when you do your rebidding, another institution also picks up that responsibility. You still continue working with them and then training them and building their capacity. So in Sierra Leone, it is IGR that does the survey. So if you look at the map, you will see the countries where we've been operating. All the colored areas are countries that we run the survey. The gray areas are the countries that we are yet to move into. So as I said, if you look at the picture from round 1 all the way to round 9, we've been working in about 39 African countries. So the issue is, when we bring a country on board, because there are certain criteria that we follow, that country becomes Afrobarometer country. One of the criteria is that the country should be politically open. People should have the free will to speak their mind. You don't want to go and do a survey in a country where somebody speaks, you finish, you are gone, and that person has a problem because there will be some kind of reprisal. So one thing that we do is to look at the political openness of the country. So before we even come into a country, we will come around to do some kind of political assessment of the country, speaking with institutions and individuals before we come back again and look for an institution to support us. So when you have this kind of condition, and then the country is politically open, you start a survey. Where there are maybe difficulties and challenges, you put the country on hold for a time. When the conditions improve, then you come back again and continue with the survey. So for instance, as I'm speaking, one of the countries that I manage, Algeria, has been unknown for some time now because of the political situation. Nobody is willing to take up that responsibility of collecting the data in that country because of political reprisals that people are afraid of. So all these countries, when you look at them, some of them you may see that there are political challenges, but we are still operating there. And actually, when you look at their data across time, you can see that where most of it there are political challenges, the findings on certain key variables will become worse than what they normally used to be. And that also tells you then citizens see what is happening within their countries. For instance, I remember a clear case of one country in Afrobarometer, I think Burkina Faso, during former President Blaise Compaoré time, when he wanted to change the term of office to go for another round, and then citizens went attacking parliament. By then, the Afrobarometer survey found out that almost about 67% of the citizens were in favor of the two-term, and yet he went ahead and he had that challenge. So Afrobarometer survey findings, when you look at it, you can clearly see that at times we think citizens don't know what is happening in their country, but when you analyze the data, you really come to realize that they do understand the challenges. So what is the methodology that we follow in collecting the Afrobarometer data? First, we use a nationally representative sample of adult citizens in the various countries. So in Sierra Leone, for instance, we look at people who are 18 years and above, and it is nationally representative in the sense that if you have 10% of your population, adult population coming from a particular region, we ensure that our sample also will have 10% of our respondents coming from that region. And if that 10%, it is 50-50 rural urban, we also make sure in our sample that 10% will be 50-50 rural and urban. So that is what makes it nationally representative sample. In terms of the selection of our respondent, there is a strict protocol that we follow during the data collection. We train the field workers over a period of time, 6 to 7 days. We do piloting of the survey, testing the instruments and testing the protocols. And then when they get out there, before you pick a respondent, there is a process by which you select the structure. After selecting the structure, you identify a household within the structure. After identifying that household, you identify the citizens within that household who qualify, and then you go through a random process in selecting one of them. So you, the field worker, you don't have control over who you select. You can't just look at people's faces and decide that I will speak to this one, I will not speak to the other. The processes that you follow will pick the person for you. And we also ensure that our sample, as I said, is distributed in a manner that it reflects the national population, adult population distribution of the country. And so these processes ensure that each and every citizen has an equal chance of being selected to be part of the survey. We use face-to-face approach in collecting our data, and it is very costly because you have to send field teams all the way to the rural areas where your enumeration areas are. And as I am saying, the selection of the sample even has to do with the population frame of the country. So no country doing Afrobarometer is able to do any survey without working in collaboration with the National Statistics Institute of the country. So over here, I think you work with what is your National Statistics Institute? Sure, they work with them. So it is from there you can get the population frame to do the selection of your enumeration areas where you will be sending your people. So this is how we go about the whole thing. In terms of the questionnaire, we use a standard questionnaire. So the questionnaire that we use for Afrobarometer in Sierra Leone, it is the same questionnaire we use in all the 39 countries. However, because we also know that there are certain issues within our individual countries that people will want to hear more about, so the questionnaire has some slots in there, about 5 spaces for country-specific questions. So in that context, what the national partner does is to look at the environment, what are the topical or critical issues at that point in time, and then they frame questions around them, and then insert those questions into the questionnaire. So when you pick Sierra Leone questionnaire and you compare it to Ghana questionnaire, you see that most of the questions are the same, but when you come to the session that takes care of the country-specific questions, that is where you will see the differences, because the issues that Sierra Leone will want to track may be different from the issues that we want to track in Ghana. The sample size for the survey in Sierra Leone is 1,200 adult citizens, and with this type of sample size, giving them confidence interval of 95%, the margin of error on our findings is plus or minus 3%. In Sierra Leone, the field work for round 9 took place from 13 June to 9 July. And I remember I was here, supported them to do the training and also did a little bit of monitoring. So virtually, this is what Afrobarometer stands for. And so when you are here this morning to listen to the findings, know that these findings that we are presenting, we got them after going through rigorous kind of systems, and that it is not only IGAR that is pushing this agenda. IGAR has the backing of over 38 African countries, has the backing of the Afrobarometer Secretariat, and the backing of the Ghana Center for Democratic Development. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we need another round of applause for. So let me not leak Frederick's presentation. I'm just putting it back. So they normally say we can do it better. So we are going to, maybe after this, I'll just leave everything to you to do everything for the rest of the session. But Daniel is right. Yesterday we did a presentation to government. So we did a confidential briefing of government for government. So normally when this data is collected, it's over 100, 200 questions. And sometimes, some of you might have been respondents. We bore you, we take over an hour asking you many things, from your welfare, the way you look at government. In fact, there are questions on how people perceive China. This year we decided to focus on China. So yesterday we did a comprehensive briefing of government, and by January we'll be doing a comprehensive briefing of donors, the same presentation. This is the first dispatch that is going to be out, and there's going to be several dispatches. So it's a huge reservoir of data that can be used by people like you. So it's really generated for people like you. So we're really happy that you're here today. Now let me invite someone who you all know to steer the program right from from now on. You may think you know this person, but after I introduce her, you'll know that you have no idea who this person has been. She's an educationist and an advocate, and is the Director of Academic and Career Advisory, Counseling and Student Complaint Services at the University of Sierra Leone, comprising of 3 constituent colleges, Furby College, IPAM, and College of Medicines and Allied Health Sciences. She's also a lecturer of literature and gender justice at the Department of Language Studies and at the Institute of Gender Research Documentation, respectively at Furby College, University of Sierra Leone. Let me call her name. She's Fatmata. Fatmata is the immediate past president, because I know the more I continue, the more you know. I don't want to sound silly. Fatmata is the immediate the renowned 50/50 group, Sierra Leone's foremost gender parity and women's leadership advocacy institution. She's a Martha Farwell Memorial Fellow of the 2020 cohort and serves in various capacities as a member of the multi development, particularly of young people and especially girls. She sees the advancement of quality education and acquiring relevant skills as the solution to the challenges many women and girls face and young people face. She believes in holistic wellness. She's married with 3 children, for those of you who are still looking around. Dr. Fatmata Taki holds a multidisciplinary PhD in social sciences and an MA in women's studies from the Anglia Ruskin University, that's Cambridge in the United Kingdom, postgraduate diploma in education, and a BA degree in English and French from the University of Sierra Leone, that's Furby College. She has attended and facilitated many national and international conferences and workshops, and has published poems and a short story in 3 Sierra Leonean authored collections, co-editing 2 of them. Ladies and gentlemen, let us put our hands together for the tour. Fatmata Taki. We normally call out a short the chair is left, I will do that.
Yes, the things in the
Yes. Okay. No, I mean, Freddie just remind me of protocol. So Freddie will be doing the introduction. I will be doing the presentation, and it's after. I don't know, Freddie, you want to wait for the mic?
Can you all hear us?
There we go.
So
Yeah.
I think,
Yes.
in fact, I don't like mics. So
Yes.
it's all right. As long as you can hear me,
Yes.
the mic is coming.
Okay. All right.
Online here.
Oh, okay.
Online audience. They should come into it. Okay, so good morning, everybody. Cabo, welcome. It's great to see all of you. Welcome, Madam Minister. Welcome all of our distinguished guests. It's wonderful to see so many top-notch women here. It's good to see the gentlemen as well. You are most welcome in this space. As Andrew said, I'm Dr. Fredna Mokwakela. I'm a Research and Policy Director with IGR. I'll do the presentation, and then Dr. Fatu Taki will moderate us. So she will invite people up. But for now, because the presentation is behind us, we have moderators we have discussants who will come after. So let me just quickly, before we start, say that given that we have 16 days of activism, given the issues that we've had around women and violence, etc. in Sierra Leone, and given the fantastic steps that we're seeing. A bill was recently passed. We have a policy. I'm really happy that our first dispatch with AB. AB has a range of information, but it's great that our first dispatch is on women and children, which are just so instrumental to our development in Sierra Leone. And so we're happy that we have the Minister of Gender and Children's Affairs here. We're happy to have so many of you representing really key organizations that are working on these very important issues. So what I'm going to do today is go through our findings, and the findings that you will see are on women and equality, gender-based violence, and children. So those are the three areas that we will be focusing on for this presentation. Top findings that I will be going through. First, on gender equality. We have 7 in 10 citizens that say women should have the same chance as men of being elected to public office. Given that we have a GUI Act now, given I think 1 in 3, we can see that citizens definitely support this. So we should be seeing at least 30% minimum. It's not that all we want more, but at least a minimum of 30%. Gender-based violence. We see that a majority of Sierra Leoneans say that domestic violence should be treated as a private matter to be resolved within the family rather than in criminal matters. So that's a top-line heading for GBV. And then on child welfare, we see that only about 3 in 10 Sierra Leoneans say that resources are available in their community to help abused and neglected children. And the children with disabilities, so 29% for abused and neglected children, 27% for children with disability. And then we see even fewer that say that children, as well as adults with mental and emotional problems, can get help. So those are our top findings. Before we delve into those, just to give you a sense of the demographics, which are in line with national demographics in Sierra Leone, as Daniel has explained how we do that. We made sure for gender, however, that we were intentional to have 50% women and 50% men. In terms of residents, we have 44% of people in the urban areas, and we have 56% of people in rural areas. In terms of education, 40% of the sample have no formal education, 12% have primary, 35% with secondary, and 13% with post-secondary education. And then in terms of religions, as you can see, it's predominantly Muslim, which is reflective of Sierra Leone, 78% Muslim and 22% Christian. So the first set of findings that we will be talking about are views on gender equality. What do we see? First, in Sierra Leone, we find of the people that we spoke to, the 1,200 people that we spoke to, women were less likely than men to have post-secondary education and more likely to have no formal schooling at all. So it's important to note for this figure, these are people that are 18 and above. So these are people in Sierra Leone, nationwide, 18 and above. This is what our population looked like. Less women have post-secondary education, and women are also more likely to have no formal schooling. The second, we looked at assets, and women are less likely than men to own assets like radio, mobile phone, and bank accounts. But we see that there's no real gender gap when it comes to control of household money. So within the household and how women spend their money, there was less of a gender gap there. More than 3/4 of Sierra Leoneans say that women should have the same rights as men to own and inherit land, but support for equal rights to jobs are considerably weaker. We also see that 71, this is what I said in the beginning, 71% of citizens say women should have the same choice, same chance as men for public office. We also see 8 in 10 respondents who think a woman will actually gain standing in a community she runs for office, but more than 4 in 10 say that it's likely that community members will criticize or harass her. And then finally, in top line findings, 3/4 of Sierra Leoneans say that the government is doing fairly well or very well in promoting equal rights and opportunities for women, with 2/3 who want it to do more. So this is just graphic representations of the discussion. We can see that when it comes to primary and secondary school, that the numbers are quite similar. 13% for women to 10% of men in terms of primary school education. At the secondary school level, 34 and 36, so very little difference. Where the differences come are no formal education, where you see 46% of women having no formal education, compared to 34% of men. And then when it comes to post-secondary, so university and the like, we have 7% of women reporting that compared to 20% of men. Asset ownership, we can see mobile phones. Women, 58% of women say they have a mobile phone compared to 78% of men. With radio, 38% of women compared to 70% of men. So you see a very big discrepancy in these assets. TV, we have 20% compared to 25%. 25% of men say they have a bank account compared to just 9% of women. So again, this is something that's in the new act in terms of increasing access for women to financial services. For motor vehicles, 4% of women say they have cars compared to 17%. For computers, 3% of women compared to 7% of men. So you can see across all the asset ownership indicators, women are lagging quite severely behind men. Now here, this is decisions about money and how money is used. You find that those who say that they make decisions on their own, 36% of women say they make decisions on their own compared to 32% of men. So more women actually say they make decisions on their own than men when it comes to using money. In terms of jointly with their spouse, we have 36% of women who say they make decisions jointly with their spouse compared to 40%. So more men actually say they make decisions jointly with their spouses. And then you can see for family members, 17% of women say they make it with family members versus 21% of men. 8% of women say that the spouse makes the decisions, compared to 5% of men that say it's their spouse that makes decisions. And then others making decisions is pretty much the same. Okay, so we then talked about land and access to land, and there's also been an act that's just been passed about land. But here, we asked for each of the following statements, please tell me whether you disagree or agree that women should have the same rights as men to own and inherit land. And we see large majorities of people that say, yes, there should be the same, 78%, so that it's over 3/4. They say we should have equal rights to land. But you can see that more women say women should have equal rights than men do, 81% compared to 74%. And this is a trend that we'll see throughout, where on many of these indicators, women will be more likely to want stronger aspects. So whilst we have parity, or whilst we have a majority that say it's important for equal access to land, when it comes to priority for scarce jobs, it's less equal. We see that you actually have 39% of citizens that say that they strongly agree or agree that men should have priority. Only 56% of people say disagree with the statement that men should have priority. And then we can see some gender differences, 45% compared to 49%. And we also see at the primary school level, more people at the primary school level are saying that if jobs are scarce, men should have priority for jobs. This is on elections, and whether women should have an equal chance to be elected. So again, you can see it's a majority, over 7 in 10, that say yes, women should have an equal chance of being elected. But you can see gender differences here. 76%, so close to 80% of women say that women should have an equal chance to be elected, compared to just 66% of men. So it's good that we have a majority, but we need to work needs to be done on male attitudes. You can see rural, urban, you have more people in the urban areas that say women should have an equal chance to be elected compared to those in the rural areas. And then we can also see that it changes by education. Those with post-secondary education are more likely to say women should have an equal chance of being elected, 81%, compared to 65% of those that have no formal education. So what does this mean? The more educated you are, the more likely you are to say that there should be equal chances for women. And then we see, actually, interestingly, that this is highest amongst those who are over 55 years old, and younger people, 18 to 25%, only 65% say women should have an equal chance of being elected. The next set of questions that were asked was, how will running for elective office affect women's lives? So given that we're talking about having more women in politics, what happens if women run? You have 82% of citizens that say if a woman runs, she will actually gain standing in her community, which is good. But you still have 42% of people who say that she will be criticized or harassed by others in the community, and 21% that say she will face problems with her family. So we still see that the criticism, harassment is still active, and the idea that problems within the family might be an issue. The last question in this set is looking at government performance in promoting equal rights and opportunities for women. And it's very positive. We have 76%, so again, over 3/4 that say the government is doing well, fairly well, or very well in terms of promoting women's issues. But interestingly, you'll see that men are more likely, 79%, to say the government is doing well, women, 72%, but both show that there's high approval in terms of what's happening, in terms of the things the government is doing in terms of promoting equal rights. We can see that its highest approval are amongst those really with more education, primary, secondary, and post-secondary education. Then the last question is, should government do more or less to promote equal rights and opportunities for women? And here we see that overall 64%, so over 6 in 10 say that more should be done to promote equal rights and opportunities for women. 67%, so more women are saying more should be done, 67% compared to 61% of men. So this is the module on gender equality. And next we'll talk about gender-based violence and what citizens are saying about GBV. Top line findings here is that Sierra Leoneans see gender-based violence as the most important women's rights issues that government and society must address. So GBV is the most important thing. Interestingly, you have 2/3, so 67% of citizens that say violence against women is not very common or not at all common in their community. Although you have 32 to 36% of women that disagree with this. We also see that a majority of Sierra Leoneans, again interesting, say it is never justified for a man to use physical force to discipline his wife. Yet you have 3 in 10 that say it is sometimes or always justified. We have that almost half of respondents consider it somewhat likely or very likely that a woman will be criticized, harassed, or shamed if she reports GBV to authorities. Only 37% say that it's unlikely. At the same time, on a positive note, 93% think that the police will do something, are likely to take GBV cases seriously. And then finally, a majority of Sierra Leoneans say domestic violence should be treated as a private matter to be resolved within the family rather than a criminal matter. And again, this is just the graphs of all of this. So GBV is the most important issue that they feel government should address. After GBV, at 33%, you had unequal access to education coming in next, and then too few women in influential positions in government came after. Equal pay in the workplace and property ownership were seen as lower in terms of issues that needs to be addressed. So this question is where you see people who talk about the prevalence of GBV in their communities. And you can see 50% saying it's not very common, not 17% not at all common. So even though it's seen as the most important issue that should be addressed, most important women's rights issue that should be addressed, people are reporting that the frequency of GBV is a little lower. So you have to think about that. By demographic group, and then here, sorry. Okay. The next is physically disciplining their wives. So here, as we said, 70%, so 7 in 10 say it's never justified, but we see more women than men saying it's never justified. 74% of women say it is never justified for a man to physically discipline his wife, compared to 66% of men that say it is never justified for a man to beat his wife. Then, as I said, we have questions on whether women will be criticized or harassed or shamed for reporting GBV. And here, the total, you have 37% that say it is very unlikely, compared to 14% that say it is somewhat unlikely that a woman will be criticized, harassed, or shamed for reporting GBV. And the final one here, do people take GBV cases seriously? And when we talk about GBV, we actually say, you can see in the question, it says, if a woman in your community goes to the police to report being a victim of gender-based violence, for example, to report a rape or report being physically abused by her husband, how likely or unlikely is it that the following things might occur? The case will be taken seriously by the police. And we can see here that a majority of people say that it is very likely or somewhat likely that the case will be taken seriously by the police. Now, notwithstanding that people say that GBV cases will be taken seriously, when we ask the question of whether domestic violence, and again, when it comes to the question about domestic violence and whether it's criminal or private, you see here that citizens are actually saying, more citizens say that it should be treated as a private matter. So 57% say that it is private, compared to 37% that says that it should be treated as a criminal matter. And this is breakdown by demographic. So we see 56% of women compared to 58% of men. 61% of people in the rural areas say it should be private, compared to 52% of people in the urban areas. So people in urban areas are more likely to say that it should be a criminal matter. And then we see how it breaks down by education. 62% of people with no formal education, right, are more likely to say that it's a private matter. You can see 62%, primary school 55%, secondary school 57%, but people who are educated are less likely to say it should be seen as a private matter. And then poverty, we also break these down by poverty, and we see that people who are, the poorer you are, the more likely it is to say that you are to say that it's a private matter. So 72% of people who are highly poor, high-lived poverty, are more likely to say treat it privately compared to those who have moderate-lived poverty or no-lived poverty. Okay. So now we'll go to the final set of slides, and this is on child welfare. Here, we see that a solid majority, so 60% of Sierra Leoneans, are saying that parents are sometimes or always justified in using physical force to discipline their children. But opposition to physical discipline has actually increased. So more people are saying it's not justified to beat your children. That's increased from 33% in 2018, when this was asked, to 40% in 2022. We also asked the question about the prevalence of child abuse and neglect in communities. And we see that most Sierra Leoneans, over three quarters, say that child abuse and neglect are not prevalent, and out-of-school children are infrequent problems in their community. So 75% for child abuse and neglect, 60% for out-of-school children in the community. When it comes to addressing these concerns, though, for abused and neglected children, only 3 in 10 say that there are resources available to help abused and neglected children. So 29% say that there's resources for abused and neglected children, and 27% say there's resources to help children with disability. When it comes to mental or emotional problems, this number drops even further, with only 19% saying that children and adults with mental or emotional problems can get help. You see a majority of Sierra Leoneans say that the government is doing a good job of protecting and promoting the well-being of vulnerable children. 58% say yes, government is doing a job in this area. So these are just the graphs again, essentially saying what we've just talked about. 27% saying it's also always justified, compared to 8% in 2022. So you can see the decline in this area. And then this is a breakdown by demographic group. So you actually see that less women than men say it is justified for parents to physically discipline children. And then you can see the same, more people in urban areas. You can see by formal education, poverty, as well as age. And then here, this question is asking, how frequently do adults use physical force to discipline their children? And we see that 44% say not very frequently, right? Compared to 17% that say not at all frequently, 10% that say very frequently, and 29% they say somewhat frequently. And here we have the breakdown by demographic group. And you can see the question is, how frequently do you think the following things occur in your community or neighborhood? That adults use physical force to discipline children. And the percentages that we see here are those who say somewhat frequently or very frequently. So the average 40% that say that it happens somewhat frequently, very frequently. Women are less likely to say it happens frequently than men are. People in rural areas are less likely to say it's more frequent than those in the urban areas. We can see some differentiation by education, some differentiation by lived poverty. So this question, how often are children abused, mistreated, or neglected? We can see the percentage that says not at all frequently is 40%. This is 35%, 16%, and 7% that say children are abused or neglected, versus the children who should be in school who are not in school. And this is by urban and rural areas. So you can see, as we said earlier, the children who are abused, those who say that it happens frequently, you have more people in urban areas that say it happens somewhat frequently or very frequently compared to those who are in rural areas. And you see the same in terms of the children who should be in school that aren't in school. Again, higher occurrence in urban communities compared to rural communities. Here when AD researchers go into the communities, they look around in the community to see are schools available, health clinics available, police station, or a government office where people can ask for help. So this question is asking about the prevalence of these, and the figures we see here are the percentages of those who say yes, these are available. So we see that schools, 85% of people say yes, there's a school, a survey enumerators can see a school in the area. Only 69% say that there's a health clinic, 40% that say they see a police station, and then 11% that say that you can see a government office where people can request help. So that's just public services at the community level. And then here we talk about help for vulnerable children, which as I mentioned earlier. We can see that only 29% say abused and neglected children can get help, 27% that say disabled children can get support, 19% that say, that agree or strongly agree, children and adults with mental or emotional problems can get help. And then the final slide, you've done well, you kept with me, final slide here, approval of government performance on child welfare. And here we see that the question is, how well or badly would you say current government is handling the following matters, or haven't you had enough to say? Protecting and promoting the well-being of vulnerable children. And the numbers that we see here are the percentages of people who say fairly well or very well. And the average is 58%. So nearly 60% that say that the government is doing fairly well or very well when it comes to protecting vulnerable children. Women are slightly less likely to say that it's doing very well or fairly well, 55% compared to 62%. Some rural-urban differences. and then not so much with education. You can see that those with post-secondary education are more likely to say that government is doing fairly well or very well, and then the more wealthy people, those with low and low-lived poverty, are also more likely to say the government is doing fairly well or very well. So I know that was a lot to digest, but we've come to the end, and I am going to handle it to Dr. Fatou Taki, who will ably steer the ship from here on out, inviting our moderators and inviting our speakers and discussants. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Dr. Fredling. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Protocols of that, Madam Minister, welcome. This is this report really, I think, it puts us at a place where when the research is done and we're able to see the evidence of things that come out of this. So what we call them doubting Thomases should be able to see where people have made their opinions known. And it's very important having kind of qualitative ones where you're able, and I think that's why I like the barometer, because it gives the people a chance to be able to say things that they would normally not say, or they will not have a platform to express them. And now they have the chance to be able to say this. I think very mind-blowing results that have come up there. And with me, I'm going to have 3 sets of ladies who are all well-grounded in the issues that we're looking at. The gender equality, we're looking at the child welfare, and we're looking at the leadership of women in leadership positions. And Madam Minister is already here. I'll just quickly introduce her. She became Minister in 2019, Honorable Mansi Tairawali. And within a year, she was able to get the GIWI policy launched, which was, I think, December or so in 2020. She sees herself as the leader and champion of women's empowerment, with extensive contributions that she's made to women's health and economic empowerment. She's a project management expert and an alumnus from the Harvard Ministerial Leadership Forum. She holds an MSc in project management from the UK, and without her being an honorable minister, she's a woman of her own standing. So kindly give Honorable Mansi Tairawali. I also have with me a lady who is a practicing barrister and solicitor at the High Court of Sierra Leone. She's the head of advocacy and movement building for Purposeful. She's been a senior counsel for Legal Aid Board. She's been a state prosecutor at the Law Officers Department. She's been the secretary of the General Legal Council. And she's been the vice president of Lawyers, which is a group of female lawyers. She's a media personality, both radio, TV, social media. She has other interests. She's very interested in football. She has philanthropist interest, social interest. She's part of the Eminent Women Peace Mediators, part of Power Women, no other than Nikki Spencer-Coker, Esquire. And I must say, she doesn't need the Esquire behind, even though it's supposedly just for men. Nikki, please take a seat. Thank you. You can choose any one of them. Okay. And last but not least, I also have another very strong, well, I don't like using that adjective actually, a very professional barrister and solicitor with a background in criminal law and human rights. and with an emphasis on women and children's rights. She walked her way from legal officer to the executive director of Advocate, which is a female-led human rights legal aid organization, where she represented men and women on death row, and she's been there to advocate for better conditions for women in detention. She's very much interested in women's rights and disability issues. She's been the president of Lawyers. She's won many awards, and she played a key role in reviewing the Sexual Offences Act. This is no other person than Simiti Lavali. Kindly welcome her. So I think how I'm going to do it is that I'm going to ask each of the discussants to give a view of the report, what they've heard, what they've seen, after which I will give some questions, but also I want to have you involved as the audience. So you can be able to say something as well. You can be able to have your say on what's there and what they have said as well. So that we have it interactive, but we still need to, still going to keep it for 30 minutes. So I am going to start with the Honorable Minister. If I can kindly, we can all have your views on what you have seen and what you have heard on this report. And after which, I'll come to Simiti, who is also from the Human Rights Commission, before I come to Nikki, who would be from the INGO point of view and civil society point of view. Yeah? Madam Minister, if you can kindly have your views, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Fatou Taki. I want to say thank you to IGR and Afrobarometer for this survey, and also for this event, for really showcasing, sort of the gender aspects and the children's aspect from the survey. We know it's a perception survey, but perception is truth. So it's opened a lot for me in terms of what people perceive as the truth. When we talk about gender-based violence, it's, the survey highlights it as a priority in Sierra Leone. And for us as government, gender-based violence is a broad term. It includes sexual, domestic, psychological, community, as well as economic violence. And for us, being that our definition is that as government, it is therefore the overarching dysfunctional social construct that we need to address. And that is one of the reasons why the ministry was set up. You can see, even though it is clear that when it comes to sexual violence, it's important, and people see that government is really, sort of making significant efforts, there's more to be done. And when we look at sexual violence, 90% of the cases are under the age of 18 that we receive. So while it is still a sexual violence issue, it is also a child welfare issue, because we see less women. And to address sexual violence, we at the ministry and as government are taking a two-pronged approach. We're looking at prevention, and we're also looking at response. How do we prevent this from happening, and how do we respond when it happens? And for prevention, we have the male involvement strategy, and we've trained men and boys that are in the community, and they are male advocates on gender rights. And we're seeing, as a result of that, we're seeing slowly, but we're seeing change in behavior, because the data now is showing us that we're not seeing so much adult and child sexual violence, we're seeing more peer-to-peer sex as reported. We've also, in terms of prevention, we have integrated sexuality education into the basic education curriculum. It means children are now taught gender rights across all age groups. So children know what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. We've also developed a parenting strategy, and that is also being implemented to teach parents, particularly mothers, how to care for the children. What should they be looking for? How do they protect the children, particularly when it comes to sexual violence? Economic empowerment of women through the Entrepreneur Fund is also something that we've implemented. And that is also because we know from data that when a woman is economically empowered, she can protect her child from sexual violence. When it comes to response, we have the SGBV response strategy that incorporates one-stop centers that we have that provide comprehensive survivor-centered services. We have the free rape hotline, the sexual offences court, and of course, we have community safe homes. We introduced the approach of community safe homes, which is different from having a standalone community safe home. And we are seeing that that is really providing real benefits, because when it comes to integrating the child or the woman back into the community, it's a lot easier and it's a lot more sustainable. On domestic violence, government considers this a criminal offense, and I'm yet to see the evidence that would allow us to put forward that this is a family matter, because though the numbers are not as high as what we see in terms of sexual violence, when it does happen, sometimes it can actually, lead to death. So this is a criminal offense for us, as outlined in the Domestic Violence Act 2007. And we also now see that a rape hotline is being used by women for domestic violence. The other, section talked about government, how Sierra Leoneans welcome government's efforts to address gender inequality. And the issue of inequality in Sierra Leone, as in many other countries, is a real one. We know that it is real. And to address the inequalities, that is one of the reasons why we have the human capital development as our national development policy. It means basically bridging the gap between men and women across all spectrums. And to do that, we start off with education, where we have free quality education that has now enabled a record number of girls enrollment and as well as retention. Higher education, we started off with free STEM for girls. Now it is free STEAM, science, technology, education, agriculture, and mathematics for all girls in higher education. And as was said already by Dr. Taki, the actual gender empowerment framework, being the GIRI policy, was developed and launched in 2020. And as a ministry, to implement that, we have adopted two approaches: mainstreaming, as well as by us developing the groundbreaking Gender Equality and Women's Empowerment Act that has now been enacted by Parliament. And as a result of the mainstreaming efforts, which mainstreaming basically means integrating the gender rights and demands into every sectoral policy and framework. As a result of that work that we've been doing, for the first time now in Sierra Leone, women now can own and inherit land, which wasn't happening before and can now happen now, wherever in the country with no restriction. Also, as a result of the mainstreaming efforts with the Mines and Minerals Act, mining companies now will have to do an annual social assessment of the impact of their work on women and girls. And so we will know what the impact is for us to take remedial action. Also with the mainstreaming work, the Public Elections Act also now mandates that when the next election is conducted, with every 3 names that are put forward, 1 should be a woman for parliamentary elections as well as local council elections. Then there is also the GIWI Act, and the GIWI Act promotes political, economic empowerment for women. And it also talks about mandating gender-responsive budgeting and also financial inclusion for women and gender mainstreaming, again mandated for all sectoral policies and legal framework. When it comes to child welfare, the level of discipline in Sierra Leone has always been a challenge for us, and it is one that across the international community, Sierra Leone is one of the worst countries in the world. And this is something that we're looking at, and you will see that the policy has been passed in schools, government schools, that there is no corporal punishment. And that is one of the reasons, one of the sort of solutions that we are implementing to curb the level of discipline. Also, I spoke earlier about parenting strategy, because we're educating parents, for parents to understand what is discipline, how you can discipline, how you can correct a child to ensure that the child goes the right way. But also, when it comes to child welfare, overhauling the entire child protection landscape is necessary. And we're starting with the review of the Child Rights Act. As I speak, the reviewed act has now been gazetted, and it is also now in Parliament. We're using an upgraded technology to ensure that we can control the landscape and control the services provided by child protection providers. Plans to streamline the child protection providers to ensure that we can have better control and to ensure that we can do a lot more supervision is also on the way. But I can't emphasize enough the responsibility that parents have. Sierra Leone is a very young country. Our demographic is very young. 70% of our population are under the age of 30. So parents need the education to understand how to balance income generation activities as well as raising children. And that is a key challenge for us, and that is something that we take very seriously. And we are slowly piloting to see what the findings of our parenting strategy will unearth for us to scale it up across the entire country. But I welcome the findings of this survey, and it's given us a lot for us to know that there are some areas that are not known by the people in the communities. And it is a responsibility for us and our partners to ensure that what government is doing, even though it is appreciated, but not all is known. So we need to make sure that people are fully aware. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honorable Auntie Tayowale, for that. We can see from the questionnaire and the answers there that people acknowledge that progress has been made, and that things have moved and things are gradually changing. So I think probably when we get to the plenary, we'll also see that we are making strides, but I don't think we're where we want to be. So that's food for thought, for us to sit and decide. The strides have been made now, or are being made. Is it where we want to be? Have we got there, or is there a lot more that needs to be done? And you also highlighted some of the things. One of the things that clearly came out there was it looks like the more you are educated, the more you have access to kind of formal education, the more you get to accept there's some things that need to be changed around what we're doing. And when you look at our socio-cultural, religious shrouding of a lot of things, where you now see people, the answers that are coming up here, that we're now seeing that a lot more people are thinking that women should be leaders, women can own things, women, children should not be abused, and all of this. So progress is being made in certain areas. I am going to go to Siniti. You're going to go from the human rights perspective, but you can give us your views about what you've seen and heard here, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Fatou, Honorable Minister, members of the panel here, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning. I join Honorable Minister to thank IGR and Afrobarometer for this research study. For us at the Human Rights Commission, we're there to promote and protect human rights of all in Sierra Leone. And the promotion and protection is also guided by research, by findings. And so for us, this research report is very useful for the work that we do. And we would interrogate the data from a human rights point of view. We look at, is this for, under gender, we're looking at gender equality, we're looking at whether the right of equal participation, that's how we would interrogate whether the perceptions there about equality or non-equality, what do the local and international and regional standards say about that? And then gender-based violence, freedom from violence under CEDAW, and then Child Rights Act under the Convention and Rights of the Child, and also the Child Rights Act. So we'll be looking at the data and analyzing and seeing how far has Sierra Leone gone and how much further, how much more work has to be done. So we are very pleased anyway to see that people appreciate the efforts that government is doing in terms of all the different aspects. For gender, I was quite pleased to see that generally men and women would believe that there should be some level of equality in terms of standing for elective office. So which is good news, which means that as we're going forward every year when we do our state of human rights in Sierra Leone, we'll be looking at the actual reality when we look at the numbers, and then at every level, not just elective at governance, but even at the local level, in the village committees, in the ward committees, and the local councils, separately from looking at now cabinet and parliament. So we'd also be looking at that and comparing it with the perceptions that we're seeing now in 2022, which would be sort of like a baseline for us. So I think generally the results on gender are welcoming, because it will help us to, as I say, think about how we go about assessing the state of that within Sierra Leone, and then how we can improve and how we can advise government, because we also have a role as Human Rights Commission to advise government on laws and implementation of the laws. So on the gender equality is quite pleasing. On the child rights, I had some sort of reservations, because you're asking adults about whether they do violence against children, and I don't think necessarily people are going to say, yes, I need my child. I think the results would have been different if you had asked children themselves, do you experience violence? So, in as much as they said I don't think, their perceptions will be right because they're adults. But I think if Afrobarometer wants to actually get real perceptions, I think ask the children. Because I know when we go out there, there is so much, because violence is not just about not going to school, but we have child labor, there are all sorts of things going on there. So I don't think, for me, the perceptions of the adults are necessarily really reflective. And I also noticed the difference between the urban and rural. And I'm thinking in the urban areas, there's a high expectation of what you should do for children, so there's more awareness. So in the rural area, taking your child to go farming and everything when they should be in school, you're not going to say it's a violence, I don't think. So the Child Rights Act as the child rights aspect, we will take it, but I think there will need to be further interrogation of that. On the issue of the gender-based violence, I think the question on whether it should be a domestic or should a criminal, but I think the specific question was looking at rape and physical violence. So definitely, it is a major concern if they think rape or physical violence should be something that should be addressed at home. So it's a concern. But if it is the wider domestic violence, if it be the emotional abuse or the withholding of economic assets, definitely, I think even the Domestic Violence Act does allow the magistrate to say, go and resolve this at home. If you can't, then we'll continue with it. So if it's just purely about rape and physical violence, then definitely it's very worrying that they say they think it should be settled at home, because that's not what the law is saying, and that's not what we want to see. And as an institution also mandated the amendment, the Sexual Offences Amendment Act 2019, the Human Rights Commission, along with the Ministry of Gender, have to do annual reports which should be presented to Parliament, which showing the implementation of the Act. And so it will be worrying to us to see that people think that should not actually, that aspect of gender-based violence should be treated at home. Then another thing I saw, which is not very direct there, I think there's an intermediate between the equality and the GBV. Because when I looked at the assets that women have, it also made me think, if you say you don't own a radio, you don't have a car, and those things, first of all, when we do radio campaigns, then are they really addressing people? Because if most of the women don't even have that, our radio campaigns telling women about rights, have they really been effective? So we start to have to look at the data to say, what is the most effective way we want to communicate to women? So we know if it's men. Because I always wonder, whenever I go on talk shows on radio, it's always the men who call it. So from this, I start to think, is it because they're the ones who have the radio, or maybe the women don't know they have radios on their phones so that they could actually listen? But it makes me think. And I saw that the expectations, as Dr. Fatou mentioned, about the urban people, there are more demands, and generally in the urban area, you are more likely to have access to education, access to resources, access to the other things. And we saw even with the children one about the aspects of the amenities in the community. You saw their schools, and then the other things. There's no government place to go. You have basically 40% of police stations. And I know when we go around the country, when there's a long distance between where you are and a police station, you're not going to go report. So even the GBV reports and aspects will be difficult to deal with, which is probably why those in the rural area might be more likely to say, treat it at home, because it's easier to deal with it at your community level rather than having to go a long distance to the nearest police station or to go to the nearest district headquarters to report to a government institution. So I think on the whole, I'm really pleased that we're having something that will be, as I said, like a baseline for us going for 2022 and going forward, so that we'll now assess how Sierra Leone is improving in terms of these three aspects. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Simiti, for bringing out some from the legal perspective. I think you've come out, and the human rights perspective. It's a very interesting point, because I know when Daniel did the presentation, I forgot we'll talk to adults. You have to be 18 and over. So it should be an interesting thing to kind of do a survey when you interview children, when it has to do with children's issues. So I think that's we'll be able to see and compare what children think as opposed to what adults think in terms of services, in terms of the care they have, the welfare, all of those. So it will be an interesting thing. So I'm going to go to Nikki now, who you wear the ING and Civil Society hat, and see what you think, what you make of the report.
Thank you. So you said giving the ING or civil society perspective, but I will definitely be specific and say, and I'm giving the purposeful and feminist perspective and looking at this report. And one good thing is data is important and data is key. And as advocates, as activists in the space, sometimes what you need to be able to counter perception or to respond to questions is data. And the good thing about this is coming from a survey of people's perceptions of the country in which they live. So the first thing is it's very encouraging, it's very good. I'm glad Minister ran through the list of her response, a list of government accomplishments. That for the most part, citizens, we think that the government's response, what the government's doing in the area of gender equality, child welfare, in terms of sexual and gender-based violence, they're doing well, but that they should be and could be doing more. I think I was most struck, and this was also put in the conclusion of the Afrobarometer report, about the fact that there seems to be some contradictions in what citizens of Sierra Leone consider to be the most important thing, which is sexual and gender-based violence and women's equality, and yet some of the responses to certain questions seem to be somehow puzzling. So I will start off by positing that there is a missing ingredient in this equation or formula, what you call it. It seems to me that this missing ingredient is feminism and the lens through which we look at our society and whether or not we consider the society as a whole to be patriarchal, and whether the systems and even the perceptions of women themselves are informed by the system in which we are in. So, for example, if domestic violence is to be treated as a family affair, to be kept at home and not to be put in the public sphere, who does it favor if domestic violence is treated as a private matter? Only 36% of women say violence against women is a common occurrence. Is this because they do not even recognize or name what happens to them as violence? Do we need to expand the dialogue, the narrative about what we consider violence to be? The concept of this violence. What is it? Should we be naming this thing? The Human Rights Commissioner, Madam Sinity, mentioned economic deprivations. Name the thing. Economic blackmail, deprivation is violence. Sex trafficking is violence. Men picking culture is violence. FGM is violence. We have this very popular term, patriarchy princesses. That's really kind of what came to my mind immediately when I was looking at the percentage of women who did not consider, what was happening to be violence. So again, I say that it seems to be the missing equation from our perspective is feminism. Women are less satisfied with the current progress towards gender equality, and yet women will say they'll be harassed if they report, or rather, not just women, but citizens say that women will be harassed if they report gender-based violence. Domestic violence should be a private matter, but at the same time, we are concerned about the current progress towards gender equality. And when jobs are scarce, men should be prioritized for getting those jobs. So, there's some very interesting, questions that came to mind when you go through the whole entire report. So, in general, I think, I'm sure we'll get into more questions, but my take on this is that there seems to be that we need some sort of relearning somewhere. Work needs to be done. We have top-line issues when we have national emergencies declared for sexual and gender-based violence, and everybody gets very happy and very hyped about it. But then when you're asking these deeper questions, underneath it, in terms of prioritizing jobs, men should be prioritized, and this is coming not just from men, but from a majority of women. Puzzling, isn't it puzzling? It's puzzling to me. And then, finally, when we talk about child welfare and something that, Sinti raised, which is, and we talked about it, maybe who was being asked these questions, maybe we need to go to those who are most affected. For example, even when you talk to girls, you need to go ask girls about their ideas rather than, the adult perspective. You might get a different response. And if we all see what happens in our communities, from my perspective, in my opinion, if I look at just outside my door, the community, the frequency of what I consider to be violence that's meted out against children, I'm not so sure about these figures that we have here. So maybe an Afrobarometer may do another survey and consider talking to below 18-year-olds to see what their perception is, to see if it matches what the figures that we have here. But I would say it's true and it's concerning, and I think if we're looking at where we go forward in terms of focusing our advocacy and attention, where resources are scarce, and this is something that is agreed by all citizens, that the resources are scarce for addressing issues, for example, mental health and mental well-being for all, not just children, that these are the things that we would then turn our attention to when we come and talk to a Madam Minister in her office about where you are allocating your resources for going forward into the future. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Nikki. So it's just nicely led to the point where I think, I think I'll have the plenary as well with this. But also, probably my views on some of the things. There's something that gave me a big nudge. The use of the term discipline. So where the GBP is concerned, and there was a question of, is it okay for the man to discipline? I'm thinking, discipline? Why would the man discipline the wife? But the same word is used for the children. So again, it boils down, and I think when we're going to what we need to do moving forward, when I ask the question where we are now and what we need to do, and I think some of these things should come in to inform that. Because if a woman, because I have had the experience where a male colleague at the university has said to me, oh, if I get card, they beat you every day. Why they beat me well? But they beat me picking. So this is an educator, this is post-secondary. A medical doctor, in fact, for that matter, who was saying, I will beat my wife. Oh, I beat my wife. Casually like that. But I don't beat my children. So when you use the word discipline, I'm like, okay, the women discipline men too. Does that come out in it? So that use of that word, when we're talking about GBP, it tells us. When a lot of these answers, you can see again what I said, the socio-cultural, religious, aspect clouding some of the answers that have been given here. And you can also obviously see the rural-urban divide. You can also see the no formal education up to primary, up to post-primary, secondary, and then you see the difference from post-secondary to what non-formal. So these are all the little bits that influence some of the answers I think that we've got. But I think moving forward, so like what the government has been doing, I think that there needs to be a lot more unpacking to our general. These, as you said, these were randomly selected people, right, who were questioned within the samples. So, but if we unpack some of these things, then a lot of things that Honorable Manti has said, Nikki has said, and Simiti has said, I think would have a tweak, a little change if some of these things are explained better and we're able to unpack this to the general populace. So people also say they don't report, it's not common according to this.
Yes.
In some of, it's strange. Every day you hear, we don't like me, don't like me, don't watch me. And yet people still think it's not common. So is it a perception that it's not something to report, it's not something we see as gender-based violence? Is that what it is sometimes? Or sometimes, I assume also the respondents were given anonymity, I want to assume. But might they think at some point that, okay, if I do say something, something is going to happen to me. So therefore, this is what I think they want to hear. So I'll just say this. So, but then again, it's a perception survey, but it should guide how we're looking at things. So these are things I'm just whetting your appetite so that we bring up when we're looking at the when we're going through this. The Honourable Minister said male involvement strategy, they're having male advocates, you know, and the Honourable MP here, I met at a meeting who said to openly, I'm not going to run anymore, I'm having a woman who's going to take my place. So that has kept, so anywhere I see you, I always think, that's the Honourable who is going to be a six-store woman. You know, so you do have men who think this way, but the majority of the people who responded there, in terms of they see the need that women need to take leadership positions. They need to see and they acknowledge that a lot has been done, even from what Andrew says, 2022 is the woman of the year of women, and 2023 will be more. But then the general perspective of the general topic is how we see these things put together. Child welfare cannot be separate from gender inequalities, cannot be separate from gender-based violence. So they're all intertwined, they're kind of clubbed together. So when we're looking at what's happening next, there's another thing, before I bring it out to you, there's another thing I think I want to bring out here. When we're talking about gender-based violence, and we're looking at the various aspects, and as the Honourable Minister said, the government is looking at various aspects that make up what GBV is. How many people in the country know that economic, FGM, as you say, physical, mental, verbal, is all part of, or they think it's part of normal way of life? How many of them understand? We need to unpack that. We need to have, I would always bring this up when we're talking about what the police is doing, and people thinking, because we're, again, a sociocultural, shrouding everything in secrecy. So we're not talking about this. So even with the perception survey, people say, oh, it's something to deal with at home. It's not something to talk about. So therefore, I think even bringing out more stories so that you hear more people talk about their experiences, people understand what it means to be there. But how do we find this? I will bring back, we need to get a DNA, forensics. It will boil down to it. How do you prove what somebody is saying? How do you prove beyond, and to get the law to be implemented fully? To get the law to be implemented fully, that aspect has to be in Sierra. So whether it's from a government view, whether it's from civil society view, whether it's from any other people who can come together and we raise funds to get something like that going, I think it will work well for our young boys and girls, and women and men. So let me throw this out to you now. The Honourable MP's hand is up. For him to react to this, to any of what has been said here, and to the report. Dr. Aisha wants to, okay, she's running.
I'm also running.
Oh, you're also running? Oh, so Aisha, please come. We'll go to the Honourable MP and then you, please. Is there another mic? Or you can just, no, for the people online.
Yeah, sorry, we are having sitting and I will have to go to the house. Thank you very much for such an opportunity, and with all that has been said, I'm here to represent the chairperson for the Gender Committee, Honourable Catherine. She's there now, we are having sitting, and most of these things that have been said here have always been said, most times. The area of women in public offices, gender-based violence, the area of child abuse and neglect. These are issues that are still going on. And we need to change the strategy how to beat this thing down. What am I saying here is, most times I as Doctor said, I gave up my seat. I said, I'm not interested anymore to be a member of parliament. I'll go and do something else. And when I said, I'm bringing in a woman, people were objecting and saying, why a woman? Why a woman? And in the society that I'm coming from, I'll tell you outrightly, you need to do more work there from Kono. That the mentality of so many people, prominent people in politics thinks, women have failed, women have disappointed because certain women have been in prominent positions, and what they did is a reaction against women now that women should not be in public offices anymore. So you have a big work or great work there to be done. Most times I tell people that if it's your sister, your mother, your aunt, or your wife is aspiring for that position now, if you are killing that spirit now that women should not be anymore in prominent positions because of certain people about what they have done, what will you say? So I have been confronted so many times about that. So you have a great work to be done there. And one of the major things I would say is, talking about domestic violence, I would say most of the human rights offices, law enforcement offices, civil societies, women groups are in all the districts in this country. You need to go right down to the interiors. Most times, most of these groups just keep the cities. Like when they go to Kenema Township, when they go to Makeni Township, go on the radio and just talk. Most of these people will not understand. But when you meet them in their own communities, talk to them in their own languages, they will understand. Most of this domestic violence is going on. Child abuse is going on. Most people, if you tell them, stop treating your child in such a way, they will say, Nami Bona, Ademena. And it's not good. Most time I tell people, I say I don't beat my children. I don't. I pick the words I say to them. And some will say, then we'll become untrained. I said, no. They need to know as a parent that you are disciplined, that you are against this, you are against this. This domestic violence, you see men, I tell men, I said, any man that beats your wife, you are not a man. You have something, you have problems in your upstairs. But what I'm saying here and emphasizing here before I leave this place is, us sitting here is planning. Implementations should be right down there to the people. There are most times we pass laws in the House of Parliament. Before us, they have passed laws. But I will tell you outrightly, there are people in the interior that do not know what the laws are. They don't even understand what it means. So they will just continue. When we went out for these one-stop centers, we had so many stories in Kairam, in Pujam, in Kenema, all other areas about what is happening negatively. You will not know until you leave this place what is happening. But how can these people know the truth? How can they know that it's a law that if you are involved in such things, you have problem, you go to jail. If you compromise with this, this is what will happen. Most of them don't believe in it, they don't know. That's why when a man tampers with a woman or a child, they will go and negotiate. Backyard. They will call the families, this might get on you. If you say the better, you're not able. Let's discuss it. So what I'm advising here is, a meeting like this is good. Taking the message to the interior, to the people out there in the urban areas, in the rural areas, in those corners, that will be of good benefit to us. That the monies that are being spent in disseminating such information will be able to reap positive results. And there will be limitations in such things. Please, it's not only in Freetown, it's not only in Makeni Town, it's not only in Kenema, but the extreme ends. Where you find difficulties to even go with vehicles, they are still doing it there. They choose within, they will just compromise and settle it. And then the victim continues to suffer. Thank you very much and God bless.
Thank you very much. No, she's gone. Did she say what she wanted? Is she? No. No, is she convey a message? No. Okay. Yes, Daniel wants to say something. Lucy?
Well, I want to react to some of the comments and issues that the moderator raised. First, on the issue of we looking at some of the questions and the wording and doing something about them, especially the question of whether a woman can discipline the wife. Yes, I have that feeling that the word discipline is too strong, and so I promise I'll carry that back to Afrobarometer for us to take a look at it again. You see, the challenge has been that because we do this survey in so many countries, you put in the word is suitable for some countries, and some countries you may have challenges, so you need to find a way around it. The second thing I want to say is, in fact, if I look at the findings on gender equality, gender-based violence, and the rest, clearly you realize that the gender equality aspect, there wasn't so much challenge, like people hide. I can tell you for a fact, when I was training the field workers in Ghana for data collection and I came to the gender-based violence issues and child welfare thing, it wasn't easy because I have been in this field for long, and I know when you are asking questions about gender-based violence, especially the person is a victim, that person may not want to come up and say it, especially when somebody is around. If even it is happening and he or she is not a victim, that person will still be wondering whether others within the household will be hearing what she is telling. So for me, when I see this kind of nuances in that data, I know some of them are hidden things that people don't want to say. And so I told some of my field workers who would be surprised that you have an encounter where the person you are interviewing will even start crying, because probably that person is going through that thing and cannot come forth. So when I see these kind of things, it rather tells me people are being honest, except that they can't come out. And so we should look at it from that angle. It's not easy doing some kind of service and having people to freely speak their mind, especially when they are going through those kind of. So that is how I look at it. So when you look at that side, this is where you see that you can't understand why somebody says it's a problem. It should be treated as a criminal thing, and yet it is not common. You can't understand. It is because the person don't want to tell you it is very common in this society, thinking you will go away, I will face the consequences. So we need to understand it from that angle.
Yes, thank you so much, Daniel. I'll also just say to the Honorable that that's again part of, before he left, I did say I will say this in his absence, that that's some of the things again that they as MPs, because they pass some of the laws. So for us to dissect these laws and pass it down to the last member of your constituency, it's part of their responsibility as well, to break it down in the language, to break it down so that people in every aspect understand what punitive measure is. If you do something, what the consequences are. It's also part of what their mandate, to represent, they're representing people within the constituencies. So, any other views? Okay, Chair now. Okay, and Keto. So, Mr. Ba and then Mr. Keto. Well, it's the men who want to speak. But
I have to say I was pretty hesitant to pick up the mic to speak because I really wanted a woman to speak before. But since the panel is made of all women, I feel like I will just pass the question to you and the panel can speak. I have two quick thoughts. One is for the folks at Afrobarometer, and maybe for you, Dr. Fredlin. I hear that the challenge between the presentation of the perception versus an analysis of the perception. I think what's the tension you're feeling in this room is that, I understand if you ask people on the streets what you think about these issues, that's what they're going to get. But what I'm wondering is, where in this equation do you have a responsibility to present this to us, not just in its, for lack of a better word, naked version, but an analysis that includes the perception that you just presented, where it's, maybe this is a question of people feeling this way. Now, there's also obviously a lot of history now and evidence of being able to do this, especially asking questions on gender-based violence and how you can do that, how you can get to a little bit more detail than it seems that we've been able to get here. And then the second thing is I'm really, really interested in the breakdown of this. Even where you have your overwhelming positives, for example, 70% of people or 67 saying GBV is not common, but then you have a good percentage of people who say it's common. What I was curious about, and I see that in some instances you presented some breakdown, but I'm curious on where it's not been presented and why, and whether you do have a breakdown, including on sensitive areas like religion. Because I don't see a religious breakdown presented, for example. In this work, and when we've done this kind of research, there's always been a very sharp disparity in regions of the country, which is something I was interested in and I've not seen, in religious affiliations and perceptions, or even just broken down around kind of who's religious and who is not. So I was wondering whether that breakdown is available, whether that could be shared with those of us who are working on this issue, because it could really inform, just in terms of us directing our interventions and the nature of the work. But otherwise, congratulations. I think it's a fantastic contribution to the field, and thank you all for your brilliance as always.
Thank you very much, Mr. Brown. Mr. Keto?
So I will just speak it from my brother there, and I will say thank you for throwing light on these very critical issues. When we talk about the issue of gender-based violence, like Minister said, it's a broad subject. I was wondering even whether the respondents really understand the broad issue itself, because from their presentation we can understand that probably they just focus on one or two areas of sexual or gender-based violence that we are talking about. So I was asking whether in the future we can just focus on specific, so that we are able to look at specific issues around gender-based violence, so that we are able to make decisions going forward. And also, I saw, like, all of us, we are talking about children and also those who are, survivors or victims. From the respondent itself, we saw a kind of analysis or breakdown from the respondent that they may think that there is no much violence within the community. But when you look at the respondent from the female perspective, they think differently, because they know they are feeling it and they are going through it. So there was high respondent from the female that the females are seeing it to be common from the analysis. So these are just two critical issues that we have to look at it, especially on the area of sexual and gender-based violence. We also need to, in as much as it's a perception survey, but we also need to take into consideration that some of those questions could ignite, trauma itself, because especially when you are talking to a victim, when you ask them some direct questions, it affects, it gives them a flashback. So this is all we have to just take into consideration going forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Do we have any other views? I just need one or two more. Yes.
It'd be great to have some women. It'd be great to have some women.
Okay, so thank you very much to IGR for the research, and thank you for this great panel. I think everyone is speaking around the GBV issue, and I think the research itself zeroed in on domestic violence. And even when you zero in on domestic violence, you have various forms of domestic violence that happens. And I witnessed a court sitting. They were passing a ruling in Canada some 15 years ago. And apparently it was a domestic violence matter. And when the judge was delivering his ruling, and the wife who was abused through domestic violence came and said, I will not allow my husband to go to jail. Who is going to look after myself and my children? And that tells you that dependency syndrome is also some of the things that you saw some of the women said, let's settle it at home before going to court. So we are now faced with a situation where even the Domestic Violence Act of 2007 is saying, if it is heavy bodily harm, then it should not be out of court settlement. So these are some of the things that we need to also unpack for people to understand that where is the economic dependency coming in, wherein you find it very interesting for somebody to say, a female to say, if the jobs are few and far between, I would prefer a man to take that space. So I would want to look at the context that we find ourselves, to juxtapose it to the research itself and see where we are coming in to say this is actually what is at hand and how do we improve on the situation that is coming on. So until somebody understands that dynamics, they are forever going to say, let's settle it at home as a private matter. But the law, like yesterday, we had some discussion, myself and the Honorable Minister, and Minister was saying, look at this situation. If it does not become a criminal matter, you know what? A lot of people are even going to do it more because they now know that it's decriminalized and now they can even go. Because educated people can say, I can beat my wife. I mean, that language itself is dehumanizing. I mean, beating. So these are just a few things, the economic aspects, and also looking at these dependency issues. How do we look at all of this? But I love that the research has unpacked. But then next time we need to begin to look at that even when you talk about physical violence, what are some of the things, attributes that are coming in? Just to add some few questions to read for them to understand better. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
I want to pass this mic to a lady.
Okay, there is a lady there who wants to say, and then after two ladies, and then we'll have just last words.
Okay, good afternoon. And I want to say
online
thanks.
questions.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
And I want to say thanks for this time and for us to be here today to be part of this great program. I am very interested going forward in what the minister spoke about and parenting, about government coming together to see how they can create this space where parents to be brought on board to teach them ways and to be able to balance their parenting skills and also going out to find for their children. Because most of the times we see parents are so engaged in going out and providing for their children that they forget to balance their roles to see how their children can be protected. And these have opened up the children to so many abuse in the community. And also I'm glad going forward that they are creating space and including the curriculum where the children can be taught about their sexual rights and how they should carry on themselves and what they shouldn't allow to happen to them. And also from my experience, working with advocates as a paralegal, I realized that when it comes to gender-based violence, so it's so prevalent, and as everybody has said, I was surprised to see the statistics and the women were saying, no, this is not something that we think is an issue. Because for me, even working with women in incarceration, when we talk with them, we interview them, we've seen that most of them, they have suffered gender-based violence in so many aspects, including the sexual, the physical. So I think it's a cause for concern. And one thing that even I personally have been saying to my organization, I can say it here openly, that there is room for so much legal education and going down into the communities and educating these women to know what really gender-based violence is all about. Because I believe if they really had this broad perception of it, it will have come out differently in the survey. So I believe there is more to be done and there is more room for improvement in all this.
Thank you very much for that. Who was it? Oh, okay, Augusta. Yes, Madam Taylor.
Thank you very much for giving us this opportunity again to come here and look at issues that are very much pertinent to the development of a nation. I want to thank you very much, the IGL, and the discussants, and even the research officer to come up with such findings. Actually, they are not new. For me, I don't want to say much because, this is actually throwing back to the men, and I'm glad that many of them responded here, because we've been talking about these issues, equality and gender-based, and even the issue of the kids being, bastardized in a way. But what I want to say here is that really, it's the system that is put in place to address the problems. We can always identify the problems, but if a system, proper system is not put in place to address the problem, we'll always be in the problem. For example, we at HAPWA, who've been with women who have been reporting to us about equality in their political parties. We've seen that many times women do not come up because they are not given the platform. It's very difficult for them to come out to take executive positions in the various political parties. But I'm not seeing in the research that's being captured. And if we're talking about equality and gender-based violence, there is no way we can forge ahead without talking about what is happening in political parties, because it's so killing. The things are so clear. Talking about sexual harassment. We are even talking about sexually transmitted positions. If you don't give, they don't give you the position. They tell you that you are so greedy, and so we will also be greedy and will not give you the position. You see, some of these things, they are difficult to talk about. It is not affecting all of us, but it's affecting most women. And unfortunately, if you are so excited to have a position, sometimes you have to give in. And sometimes you have to put up with it, because you know that when you report the matter to the police, they will delay cases until such a time that you just expose yourself and you are becoming a laughing pool. Even the people who are involved in it will start laughing at you again. So it's more disgrace. So what I want to emphasize there is, we thank you very much for this research, but how much effort are we going to put together so that when cases like that, come up, we are able to have a very serious redress mechanism that will not start, and then fail to complete. We've seen cases like that many times. They will start investigating the matter, and then we don't see the end of it.
Okay.
So please let us think about it.
Thank you very much, Madam Augusta, for bringing that perspective in. But I think now with all these laws, really, we're looking at top, bottom up approaches. And now that we have significantly, we have the electoral laws, we have what the PPRC is saying. I think some of these things should be able to be addressed within some of them. So I am going to, Dr. Frederick has some questions there, after which we have just one minute to say, the last words.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the comments. Justice about directly first. Comments came up about the AB and questions that are in the AB. So AB actually has over 100 questions. This is just a sample, and we will be releasing dispatches for the next couple of months to a year on all the different, we have things on economics, we have things on health, we have things on education. So this is just a small subset of the questions in AB. To the question about whether we have socio-demographic breakdowns, definitely. You have it by religion, you have it by age, you have it by gender, you have it by region, you have it by district. And so we can, what we showed here are the most compelling, but you saw that the presentation already took nearly 30 minutes. To present all of that would have taken more time, but this is online. The 2 reports are online, and then you can also make requests for data that we can share with you. Third, context is really important. We see here some discrepancies, as Nikki mentioned. There's contradictions. We know our context. We are in a patriarchal society. And so even how women might think, how they internalize beating, how they might legitimate it, whether they even recognize if they're being abused, all of these are factors, whether you're able to leave your abuser because you don't have the economic wealth. So we know our context. And so as we release these results, Journal asked about the tension between analysis and reporting. This preliminary is reporting. Our dispatches tend to be generally reporting, but we have policy papers where you can take this information and do more analysis. We have working papers, which are like journal level productions. So yes, we can do analysis, but it's also for you, international, national organizations on the ground. Take this. Now we know what people think. Even if we see that women aren't necessarily saying that they're being beaten, that's an issue, right? If we know it's happening and they're saying it's not, then we need to think, do we need to resensitize people? Do we need to help people think differently about what abuse is, about what violence is? It's not just beating, but it might be sending your child to the mines. So we need to take this, we need to take this on board and push it. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. So I'll ask Honorable for the 1 minute.
Thank you again, Dr. Fatu, and thank you everybody for all the comments that you've made. I mean, despite what may seem like disparity, you know, in terms of the outcome of the perception survey, for us as the ministry, it speaks to our data. It actually speaks to our data. It speaks to our data that things are improving. It is improving. That's basically what I get from this. My take home from here is that things are improving. Why do we think that the woman or a lot of women will not talk about the violence if they're experiencing the violence? Some may not, but a few will. The numbers that we're getting that are calling our hotline is dropping. You know, we were having 3 chairs, you know, before taking calls. We reduced it to 2 chairs. We're even looking at reducing it to 1. Why were they calling before and now they're not calling anymore? It is reducing. Things are happening, things are changing, people are more empowered, men are understanding. Yes, it is happening. Yes, it is happening in the villages. Yes, it is happening in the urban centers, but it is reducing. And that is the fact of the matter. Our data says that, the perception also says that. Do we want to do more? Absolutely. Should we be doing more? Absolutely. It doesn't mean because it's getting better or the numbers are dropping means we don't do more. But we must believe what people are saying. Yes, we need to reach out more. Yes, we need to flesh out some of this information, but it speaks to our data. We are seeing less people report sexual violence. We're seeing less people report domestic violence. We're seeing more women want to be economically empowered. We're seeing more women stepping in as entrepreneurs. We're seeing women come forward that want to be political leaders. We are seeing that. The benefits of that, I believe we'll see more next year, but we are already seeing now that things are changing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nikki.
So I will be less than a minute. And I will, I will jump off from what the Honorable Minister has stated, which is that things are improving, yes, and then sound my little caution. I'll give a little analogy. When you have a wart and you go to the doctor to remove it, if they just cut off the top part, it looks like you're well, it looks good for a little bit. And then a few weeks later, it will stop growing again. Unless you go real deep underneath and you dig everything out, clean it out completely. And then you'll have, you know, a clean surface that stays that way, you know, forever, basically. And so that's the way I look at these results. That and the contradictions that I see. That with the improvements, there's still a lot that needs to be done in the underneath in terms of the work that you're doing in changing perceptions, changing societal norms, and addressing the inequalities from really the bottom level. You know, the minister, the honorable who was here talked about the you know, the villages, and we know about the, you know, disparity between what people know and say in the urban centers versus what's happening in the areas that get the least amount of information. So yes, improving, but just tells me that in terms of the work that we're doing from a feminist perspective, in terms of shifting narratives and norms, you just have to dig in your heels even harder to get to the bottom of the root cause of why these things will continue. From our perspective, it is a systemic issue, it's a patriarchal issue.
Thank you very much, Nikki. Simiti?
Thank you very much. I'll just say from the human rights perspective, we will look at the findings and we'll help inform what we need to do within our Directorate of Gender and Children's Affairs, and just generally how we assess it from a human rights point of view, the improvements, and where the challenges, how do we address those challenges as required by law. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So to end, I just want to say there's a lot that needs to be done. We need to have more of our public services around the country so that they're accessible. I think we need to sensitize people more on the laws. We need to call on our MPs, as that's part of their mandate, to go into the constituencies and make sure they actually dissect some of these laws that they make, so that each one of the member of the constituency understands. Whilst we, civil society, the general public, give them support whilst they're doing that. Another thing is, one thing also got to me, this bank account business, in the discrepancy in asset ownership. Only 9% of the respondents will say that women own bank accounts. So, looking at the laws that are being passed, looking at economic empowerment, there are some things that are within the banking industries where even to rent a house, you need a man. Within the banks, you need somebody to sign on your behalf. So all of these things need to be looked at, quoting the laws, and that's why people need to understand these laws. So we have barriers in various small pockets that need to be looked at. And last but not least, I think it's fantastic that we have this data. It puts us in the frame of mind for us to think and see where we're going next, how we give government support, how we do our bits in our little corners to change some of these things, so that when this next round goes, I am sure we'll be able to have probably slightly different answers to this. So thank you so much, and with that, I'm going to call Mr. Lavali again to do his closing remarks.
It's difficult closing a moment like this because the discussion keeps becoming very interesting. But I just want I wanted to leave you with this slide. Honorable Minister, if you look at the slide, you will see the last bullet says 3/4 of Sierra Leoneans say you're doing fairly well and very well. I think we need to give Honorable Minister a round of applause. When you look at the first 5 bullets, they are saying we are doing well, but we should not feel exalted. We should feel no sense of triumph because there are challenges. So keep this at the back of the mind, and I thank you very much, Simiti. You just blew my mind when you're talking about you're actually going into the underneath of Afrobarometer data planning process. And I think there was quite a lot of conversation about how do we talk to girls. There are serious ethical concerns about talking to girls, talking to boys and girls. And I think with the limited resources Afrobarometer have, over millions of dollars just doing one wave of research, if we include boys and girls, which is really a point to take note of, I think the cost will be monumental. It will be good for us. I think that's the takeaway. Purposeful is here. Let's look at it as we need to mobilize country resources to see how girls feel about this. But I think, thank you very much, Nikki. Thank you, Fatu, the indefatigable chair. And of course, the Honorable Ministers. Let's give us a round of applause again. And all of the chairs. Distinguished participants, thank you very much. I see all the usual faces around. Thank you very much. We can go out and get some refreshments.
Lunch is at the main hotel, please.
We're taking a group picture. Yeah, let's take. Yes, you can stay. We're taking a picture.